This week on Q&A, journalist and author Christopher Hitchens.
Christopher Hitchens, what's it feel like to be 60?
Very much the same as it did to be 59. These are arbitrary dates in a way. Edmund Wilson wrote an article called The Author at 60. He wouldn't even say myself at 60 or Edmund Wilson at 60, or it had to be The Author at 60, which I'm going to read later on this week.
You're just days into the 60th year. What's life like?
I suppose I would add one thing, I mean, since you do ask. In a funny way, I never expected to live this long.
Why?
And the even more strange thing about it is, well, I can remember when 30 seemed very old to me. And I was probably only early 20s then. And that thought kept on decade by decade. And also, I didn't used to get the blues, as some people do, as decades turned. With 60, the risk of it is you say, I remember the first time I met Brian Lamb and came on C-SPAN. That was 28 years ago. And you think, I may not have another 28 to come. That hits you a bit more than it did when you were 40, let's say.
What is life like for you?
At present?
Yeah.
Well, I'm writing a memoir, so I'm having to go through all this anyway. And again, great stretches of time are involved, and the realization that first, I've seen more days than I'm going to see, seen more sunsets and dawns than I'm going to see. I can live with that. I always knew that was true. No point being in denial there. But if I didn't have children to date things by, I think it would seem very arbitrary. But what makes it real is realizing that I have a son who once was on this show with me, remember?
He's 10 years old.
Who will be a quarter of a century old next month.
He'll be 25 years old.
He will.
What's he doing?
He's working for a think tank in London called the Centre for Social Cohesion, a bit of a mouthful name, but it essentially says that religious groups shouldn't make special claims, that there should be a national and common citizenship without being denominated by faith.
You have two other children.
I do have two daughters. In fact, at present, I can say I'm the father of two teenage girls. But that'll change in September when Sophia will become 20. And perhaps even more dramatically, Antonia will become 16.
So what has been your, this is not heavy-duty policy, I know, but what has been your kind of mission with those three kids? What kind of a father have you been to them?
Pretty indifferent, I suspect. I mean, I always feel that I get better with children the older they get. I think this is probably true of a lot of men. Though why would I seek shelter in the majority? I don't normally try and do that. But a striking thing, let's say, about women is, about both my wives, is that they know what to do when babies occur. They sort of know what to do. No, very few men do. They think somehow it seems to be a female thing when they're little, and even when they're growing up a bit. I think this is probably true to an abnormal extent with me, as it was with my own father. You barely notice him until you're a bit older. And so what I hope to do to redeem how little I was involved in the infancy bit is to be a pal and a prop and a stay and a force as they become older. It's, I think, worked so far.
Go back to the memoir for a moment.
Yes.
Where are you in that? When's it due, and how much time have you spent on it, and what's your approach to it?
I spend all my time thinking about it and quite all my time writing about it. After all, it's about me, so I can always spare the time. And with luck, it'll be turned in to my publisher in the fall, and that'll mean it'll be published sometime in the spring or early summer of next year.
So, but give us the approach you're making. I mean, tell us one thing that's going to be in there that we don't know.
Oh, I couldn't tell you just one. I mean, the theme is that of a divided self. I haven't got a title for it yet, but if it was a pop song title, it would be called Both Sides Now, I suppose, something like that. That I've often felt myself exactly split down the middle and able to see, which is an advantage, both sides of every question. Able also to take one side and take it strongly, but sometimes feel the temptation to see it from the other as well. And this has been the case with other aspects of my life. Finding out late in life that my mother was Jewish, for example, I had a second identity. Spending quite a lot of time with a wife who was Greek and trying to become, in part, a member of another society, language and culture, looking for another second identity there. Taking pleasure in, if you like, having it both ways, which maybe would be a good title for the book.
Your first wife, you were married to her for how long?
Don't let me hesitate unduly, because I was with her for longer than we were married, if you know what I mean. I remember we got married the year I moved to the United States, which was B81, but we'd been a team for longer than that, for a couple of years longer. And we were separated in 89 and probably divorced a year after.
And where she live today?
In London.
Your second wife, Carol Blue.
Was Blue.
You met her where?
In Los Angeles, her native city.
And what were the circumstances?
I was on a book tour. When people say to me, just while I think about this, the thought we were just having, people say, isn't it a bit early to be doing your memoirs? Because after all, I'm only 60, and as you haven't said yet, I don't look it. But I know you were going to say that. You suddenly think, yes, maybe it is early, but you can't wait till it's too late. So if you're ever going to do it, you're going to have to do it now.
I want to, speaking of how you look, I'm going to go back to 83, our first interview on book notes together in 83. And
you have this?
Yeah, I want you to see what you look like. Let's run this.
In case I'm accused of concealing it, let me say it now. If I haven't said it already, I've already said I was a member of the Labour Party in Britain. The Labour Party is a member of the Socialist International. That's the family of socialist parties that comprises Francois Mitterrand, the Sandinista movement in Nicaragua, the British Labour Party, the Swedish Socialist Party, and many others. I still consider myself a member of that political family, and I don't feel that coming out with it on the air is, as it were, a confession. It's just an affirmation. If I'd known you were so interested in my private political views, I'd have put them near the top of the show.
I said that was book notes. That wasn't. It was a call-in show.
Yes.
And that was one of the first times we talked about.
So I'm just combing away my fringe, having looked at that deplorable young man. What did I mean by saying private political views? Surely I should have been saying there's nothing private about them. There's a slip involved there, a funny one. Sorry, you were saying.
No, I just, I do have a bone to pick with you.
Woof, that's a shock to the system.
You promised me, I haven't seen you in a long time, you promised me that when you became an American citizen, that we would go to Monticello and I would interview you there at Thomas Jefferson's home, and I never heard from you. And you ended up, where did you go?
I was very lucky. I was invited to take my oath of citizenship at the Jefferson Memorial by the Tidal Basin. On his birthday, the April 13th, which is also my own, though actually, of course, he was born under the old calendar, so by the time he died, his birthday is April 13th. It's also the birthday of Seamus Heaney, Eudora Welty, various others. And I took a representative group of Americans along there. But I thought it was for you to call me, not me to call you.
Well,
it's not too late. I've been invited to give the Jefferson lecture at Monticello. I've been a couple of times since I wrote my book about him.
Why?
I hope I'd really, really like to take you up on that.
Why are you an American?
Well, for a long time, I lived here with a green card, a platinum green card, actually, one of the old ones that never ran out, so I didn't have to renew it. I had a European Union passport. I had 3 American children, American wife, all this. I thought, no one needs to change this. I got to the point where when I came back to Dallas Airport and went through immigration and joined the right line, citizens and residents, they'd say, welcome home. And that's what I felt. It was after 9/11 that I began to feel that I hadn't paid the full price of the ticket, that I was in a way cheating on my dues. And that's for 2 reasons. One, at that point and afterwards, the United States began to be subject to a fantastic campaign of slander and defamation. People would say, it's not true that the United States was attacked, the American Jews blew up, or the Israeli Jews blew up the World Trade Center, or the Bush administration did. the country's run by cowboys and thugs and Jewish neocons. And I began to feel really protective of the United States. And I'm not going to hear you say this. It's my country you're talking about. And I suddenly thought, that's actually true. So there was that. And then I thought, because we're now going to have to talk about war and about fighting and fighting back, if I'm going to stand up and say that I think that we ought to be sending our armed forces overseas, I think I probably should be someone who could, in the last resort at least, be sort of called upon to do so. Actually, you can be drafted if you've got a green card. You can. But it felt a little more solid to me to be, of course, no one's going to, the army hasn't been found yet that would draft someone like myself. I mean, not even the good soldier Schweik. But as a matter of principle, and also that I should be voting and eligible for jury duty and all the other, both duties and entitlements. So I didn't feel comfortable till I'd got that done.
Did you vote in this last election?
I did. I turned up early.
You want to tell us who you voted for?
I voted for the senator from Illinois.
Why?
Well, I'm not any longer a registered member of any party and don't have any ideological allegiance any longer, but, and in a way, McCain's position on the war was more close to my own. But I thought Obama would learn more about the war than McCain had. McCain's position was actually rather an eccentric one about Afghanistan and about Iraq. I thought Obama showed signs of having the right stuff on this. I have to say, as an admirer of Senator McCain's, I thought he was too, how do I put this without being impolite? I mean, too exhausted to be running for anything, frankly. And that his choice of running mate was quite simply ridiculous. No, much worse than ridiculous. Insulting. Not serious. I didn't think a serious vote could be cast for the Republican ticket on this occasion. So that made that bit easy. And then I suppose I've thought for a long time, the United States has been ready for ages to prove that it will vote for a qualified black candidate. Let's get this done. I didn't think there was anything very surprising about it. I mean, all through the year people were saying things like, oh, the Bradley effect will kick in. Even if the Bradley effect doesn't, the polling machines will be fixed. If the polling machines aren't fixed, then someone will take a rifle and take the brother down. And so, no. Very interesting and impressive to see how easily it got done and how natural it seemed when it was. And though I didn't get as emotional and moist about that as some people did, it was an ingredient in making it a pleasure to vote for him. That plus, I like him as a writer, I should say. I like the way he talks, I like the way he writes. I'm impressed by his just command of English, which is the thing that matters to me the most.
Did you read his 2 books?
I did, yeah.
What did you think of them?
Well, I thought the first one was much better because it was written when he didn't know he was going to be a politician. And the second one is written under the awful knowledge that he's now in play. But even given that, you can tell he's written it himself. He's taking the risks of making various commitments he'll have to live up to. And he's got a sense of humor, sense of irony, and a really, very, really admirable grasp of the language that means the most to me.
The day we're recording this, your name came up on the morning call-in show.
It did.
Before we show the clip, I don't think I'd ever expected you to be a fellow at the Hoover Institution. How did that happen at Stanford? And politically, how did that happen?
Well, the Hoover Institution is very, very, very serious about war and revolution. That's what it's founded to consider. And war and revolution, war and counter-revolution, are the great subjects at present, or among them. Well, they're never not, but they're particularly salient now. And I've taken, I don't think a very forward position, but a very determined one, that we are at war, and that we're at war with a totalitarian enemy, and that part of our study must be how to train not just soldiers but citizens in how to fight in this war.
Are you still a fellow there?
I'm what they call a media fellow, visiting fellow. I mean, it's the Roger Mertz visiting fellow, which means that I go and talk to potential journalism students. I go and talk about literature with people there, if necessary about politics too. But I regard it as one of the academic and intellectual arsenals of the country.
Here, Mark Thiessen's Hoover fellow. Let's listen to what he said about you this morning.
He underwent waterboarding to see what it feels like, to prove that it was torture. In so doing, he proved it was not torture. A common sense definition of torture is, if you're willing to try it to see what it feels like, it's not torture. So if I told the Christopher Hitchens, I'm going to pull your teeth out with a plier, see what it feels like, would you try it? He wouldn't try it. I said, I'm going to pull your fingernails off to see what it feels like to try it. Would you try it? No, you wouldn't try it. I'm going to put electrodes on your body and put a few 100,000 or 1,000 volts through your body. Would you try it? No.
Yes, I know what he means. I mean, there's another trapdoor, if you like, underneath my journalistic investigation of self-investigation of waterboarding, which is I knew when I went in that I could stop it at any time by making a special signal to my torturers, myself. But there was only one way I felt I could advance the argument, which is to see, roughly speaking, what it's like. And, for example, in reply to Mr. Thiessen, I would say, you've heard this said, I'm sure, waterboarding simulates drowning, or the feeling of drowning. It doesn't do that at all. You are being drowned, just in slow motion. Everything in you immediately rebels against that. It's a survival question. Aha.
Where is that?
Is that the porpoise-like figure of...
that is you.
That is somewhere in the mountains of eastern North Carolina with a group of people a team of people who have had, let's say, field experience of this.
What's this feel like right here when they're pouring water down?
Well, it feels as if your last breath is about to be drawn, and you don't really have any choice in the matter. You have to, everything rebels. You have to make it stop as fast as you can. My second reply to Mr. Thiessen would be,
You're just now saying I've had enough.
I think that's pretty much, yeah. They say that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed lasted for something like 90 seconds. I'd be very surprised if that was true, unless he was trying to get us to kill him.
Didn't they also say they did it hundreds of times?
Yes, yeah, that's remarkable. The other reply I'd make to Mr. Thiessen on this point, because he's making a very serious one. After all, I was ready to do it again, and because I felt so bad about having lasted so little, I felt any son of Commander Hitchens of the Royal Navy should be able to stand up a bit more than that. So I made them do it to me again, and I lasted a bit longer this time. But, and you could say again, well, if you could stand it for 2 times, it's not torture. But the United States has always said of any regime that uses it on an American that it is torture, and that if we catch the person who did it or ordered it, we'll seek the death penalty, and has done so several times. So that it's not a matter of whether it's medieval or not, fingernail pulling, the rack and so forth, because if you allow these things, and if you say you must do them because there's a ticking bomb, or if you allow this thing, excuse me, you must do it because there's a ticking bomb, the guy's a terrorist, then what's to stop you saying, well, bring on the red-hot poker or the pincers?
So put all this in the context right now. What do you think of where the Obama administration is on this, the memos, and you know, what would you do about the past?
Well, at the same time I was taking my oath at the Jefferson Memorial to become an American citizen, I was a member of and by the way, with me was a young Marine as a witness. I wanted him, a friend of mine who'd been in Anbar province, crushing the life out of Al-Qaeda, which turned out to be a successful campaign. Very proud to have been a supporter of it, and of General Petraeus and the Surge. But at the same time, I was a named member of a lawsuit brought by the American Civil Liberties Union against the National Security Association, against the NSA, and, on illegal wiretapping. I was one of the 8 plaintiffs. And it seems to me that that's what it is in a way to be an American, that you have the right to, in fact the duty to do that, and to question the way the government is fighting your war or treating you as a citizen, even if you're strongly in favor of every measure that's taken to resist and combat terrorism, Islamization, and the totalitarian regimes that have in the past supported or underwritten it.
So right now, what should this town do about what happened in the Bush administration?
Well, I mean, I'm not a friend of the CIA, as you know, and that would have been the young Hitchens who you just saw back there, the one with the fringe and the Socialist International.
The kid.
Yeah, I'm proud of what he was saying about the Central Intelligence Agency. I mean, this is an agency that gave away Nelson Mandela's whereabouts and identity to the South African police when they couldn't find him, let him in for 25 years of imprisonment. That was the CIA. Murdered the elected, or helped to murder the elected president of Chile. Countless other horrible crimes in Greece, Uruguay, Cyprus, elsewhere. Not only that, these are criminal things, but repeatedly told us that the Soviet Union was an economic superpower right up till '89, that it was entering its golden age, and so on. It was a fantastically successful country when it was falling to pieces. George Tenet, on the day of 9/11, said to former Senator Boren, the first thing our head of intelligence said on that day was, looking at the towers go down and the planes fly in, he said, it's quoted in Woodward's book directly. He says, I hope it's not those guys from the flight schools in the Midwest, who he knew about and hadn't done anything about. So they try and cover their traces and their failures and their betrayals by torturing people. So they can say, hey, we've got results at last. This will not do. We can't have that. So someone has to go down for this, I think. I think the CIA should be closed and padlocked anyway and should be restarted. I don't think it's even susceptible to reform. And I think that's been proved by everyone who's tried to run it since Tenet. And then I think I have a special hatred for the shady lawyers who try to think of excuses, try to think of half-baked legal reasons why we shouldn't honour the Geneva Conventions, and had those passed on to men in the field who were under orders. But I want it clarified and combed out. I've been to Guantanamo and I've been to Abu Ghraib. And Abu Ghraib was much worse under Saddam Hussein, I know. And there are many worse Cuban prisons on the other side of the line in Cuba, in Guantanamo. There's a political prison there too. But that doesn't excuse us.
I want to go back to, and this program is not meant to have any major theme, it's just to snapshots of Christopher Hitchens' life in preparation for the memoir.
Indeed.
We got this off of YouTube. You were on Scarborough Country a couple of years ago at the nighttime show. And let's watch this and get your reaction.
Sweet.
Let's bring a little light to this, instead of all heat, let's bring a little light to this conversation
Light
and
comes
talk
from
about
heat.
trends.
Light only comes from heat.
Okay, thank you so much. Christopher,
Gerard,
hold on. Guys, stop. God bless us all. Just stop and let's have a meaningful conversation.
Well, don't invite
instead
me
of
on and tell
people
me to
talking
keep,
on top
don't
of each
invite
other.
me on and tell me to keep quiet.
Well,
Don't do
Christopher,
that.
why don't you let
I came
other
here to
people
talk,
talk
not to
for a
listen to
second,
you.
okay?
You invited me
Okay,
to
so
my
anyway,
opinions, not
Matt.
to listen to yours.
Okay, well, you know what, Christopher? I'll never make that mistake again.
Fair enough.
Matt, here's the question,
Merry
okay?
Christmas.
Merry Christmas and good night.
Your reaction to seeing yourself.
I think I left that one. I think I actually walked out of that one. I thought, look, either have me on, ask my view, or don't. But don't tell me what to say, don't tell me what you think all the time. I actually corrected Mr. Scarborough. I think I improved him slightly as a host and as a talk show person. He made an obvious mistake. And you know, everyone gives themselves permission to behave absurdly when religion is mentioned. And he's just another one of those who do. By the way, when are we going to mention my new paperback version of my anti-God book? When are you going to put the title and everything on the screen? When are we going to say find bookstores everywhere?
We'll do it. We'll do it shortly. We're going to go
Please.
back to '98.
Okay.
I want you to see
I hadn't thought of it till now, but
one of a relative of yours. Let's watch this. On C-SPAN's Washington Journal, the Hitchens brothers are back. One on the right coast, one on the left coast. We'll start here on the right coast with Peter Hitchens. What do you make of all of this?
Well, apart from all the laughing I've been doing, I'm beginning to feel that I've come out here perhaps a little too soon. It doesn't seem to be developing as fast as everyone in London thought it would.
It's filled me with a new respect for the American right. I'd up till now thought of them as rather an unpolished crew, the sort of people who tour the country calling for sexual abstinence among teenagers, for example. But now it seems that they can infiltrate a well-heeled liberal babe from Beverly Hills into the White House, get her in to see the president on this, just as he's come from church with his daughter, get her in to see Vernon Jordan just the day before she signs an affidavit, and get him to get her in to see Revlon just the day after she signed on the dotted line. This is genius.
Talking about Monica Lewinsky, that's your brother Peter.
Yes, that was, well, apart from the tie, which it's better not to wear one than wear one like that. I think that's me at my best, actually. I mean, saying, okay, if you believe the liberal theory that Clinton was set up and that Monica Lewinsky was a stalker, that's the sort of stuff you're going to have to believe.
What's your relationship with your brother these days?
Not bad. He's, like all Hitchenses, a man of principle. Able to turn a phrase in print and on the air. The main difference that we have is that he's I wouldn't say born again, but he's a very decided fundamentalist Christian. Not of a fanatical sort, but of a very, very decided, very determined Episcopalian conservative sort. And with people like that, I can never be completely at ease. I just can't.
Now, he lives where?
He lives in Oxford in England. But he commutes regularly. He lives between Oxford and London, where his media base is.
And what was his reaction when you found out that your mother was Jewish?
Well, we found out partly because our grandmother, my mother's mother, had outlived both my parents. The lady went to great age. And because Peter had married a Jewish wife. And when he took her to meet my grandmother said, "Oh, she's Jewish, isn't she?" And Peter sort of bridled a bit, and my grandmother, having no reason to keep the family secret any longer, said, "Well, I've got something to tell you." So it was Peter who brought me the news. I think I don't know why I say this, but I have a feeling I was just very slightly more pleased and interested than he was.
Why?
Well, among other things, he and his Jewish wife had both converted to Christianity. So it was a bit more turning over the luggage in their hold than it was in mine.
So your grandmother was Jewish?
My wife is Jewish also. So
but your grandmother's Jewish?
Yes.
And then that would make your mother Jewish, and then
yes, indeed. If you believe in Mosaic law, the law of return, and the Nuremberg laws, and I have problems with all these three laws, but yes, it's a matrilineal succession, and I'd certainly never, if I was asked if I was Jewish, whether the tone of voice was friendly or hostile, I would never say no. Would never be able to deny it or want to.
We'll get closer to your book on this clip with Anderson Cooper when you appeared on there and talked about the death of Jerry Falwell. I don't know if you remember this or not.
I remember the event quite well, yeah.
Here it is.
Christopher, I'm not sure if you believe in heaven, but if you do you think Jerry Falwell is in it?
No, and I think it's a pity there isn't a hell for him to go to.
What is it about him that brings up such vitriol?
The empty life of this ugly little charlatan proves only one thing, that you can get away with the most extraordinary offenses to morality and to truth in this country if you'll just get yourself called reverend. Who would, even at your network, have invited on such a little toad to tell us that the attacks of September the 11th were the result of our sinfulness and were God's punishment if they hadn't got some kind of clerical qualification? People like that should be out in the street shouting and hollering with a cardboard sign and selling pencils from a cup.
I don't know why I was so lenient on the little rat bag. He came on the television while the downtown Manhattan was still smoldering. There were cell phones screeching under the rubble, and people still alive. And he said, this is because we allowed divorce and homosexuality. The hell with him.
You know,
what I went on to say is that if he could have been given an enema, he could have been buried in a matchbox. And that's what I didn't get time to say on Mr. Cooper, but I got time to say later on. That's what I meant to say.
How much of what you say is calculated?
None. I mean, it's meant. I mean, in the sense of being, it's not done for effect, if that's what you mean.
Well, I mean, the
I
audience
don't say anything. No, it's a very good question. I ask myself a lot of the time because I'm often on the telly and on the radio, and I often have a book to sell, and I don't want to suspect myself of just doing things for effect. If I ever go further than I mean to, and I say something that is cheap or overstated, I always will try and come back and correct myself and say, okay, maybe that was. I don't do things just for you're You're pursing your lips, Mr. Lamb.
No, I actually wanted to...
I like to find a gifted phrase if I can and try and make it stick, make it memorable.
I really wanted to ask you, though, when there was an occasion where you and someone else really were, the word mad doesn't describe it, but you were furious with one another, or you really had a confrontation that was personal and serious and deep.
On the air,
with anybody, anyway, just in life. I mean, people that watch television never know how much of it's a gimmick.
Exactly, and that's where one wants to suspect one's own motives. This will seem odd, but I'll answer it like this. I'm reviewing a book at present of essays by Henry Fairley. Perhaps you remember him. Quite good English-born essayist, often in the New Republic, especially in the 80s, 90s. He was a great writer and a great polemicist, but I used to think that sometimes he would feign his anger. He would think, I need to get a piece, I need to get paid, I need to get an article done. He would invent a subject to be annoyed about, and I just think that will always show. So I suppose I have to submit myself, in answering your question, not to my own verdict that you're inviting, but to the safekeeping of the good taste of the audience. I mean, if the people who read me and watch me, if they think I'm doing this because I just want to make a splash, well, they're entitled to think that, and I would obviously suffer a decline in respect. I don't think, in fact, I give off the impression that I do this for effect.
But back to the other part of the question, though, what's the biggest, most serious feud you've had with any individual? And that was real. I mean, that they weren't phony and you weren't phony, and it was...
I guess it would be with Henry Kissinger and his defenders, what I can call to mind of the recent past. I wrote a book saying that I thought he should be arrested and put on trial, and that if he was, he'd be convicted for crimes against humanity and for war crimes. And he made a very crude reply to me on television, in point of fact, saying that I was everything from a Holocaust denier to a person who trashed Jackie Kennedy. And in fact, on both those charges, as you know, I can't be indicted, but I eventually got his lawyers to issue an apology about this, and I took it very seriously indeed, and I hate him, and I hate the toadies in the press and in the academy and in publishing who've helped to smooth his path.
You hate him?
Hate them. Hate him. Yeah.
And what's the...
I feel it's an insult that such a person is around, is deferred to, is consulted, is treated with politeness in the academy and by our profession and in the publishing industry. I've said all that.
Have you ever met him?
Yes, I met him 2 or 3 times. He's never been induced to speak to me, but he's sometimes had to be in the same room with evident ill grace. I think, no, that's probably been for me the most long-lasting and deep-going and most hate-based relationship I've had with anybody.
You asked about this book. We did not actually ask you on the program to talk about this book.
I know you didn't, but I'm not going to let you get away with it.
That's fine. No, it's how many copies of hardback did you sell this?
A lot, about 350,000 in hardback.
And the title is God is Not Great is now in paperback. And what kind of sales do you expect of this?
Oh, I would hope even larger, because the subject has become even more acute than when I didn't broach it. I mean, it broached itself. The battle between civilization and civil society and theocracy is becoming every day much more intense and much more urgent. And the number of people who will come now to a public debate on this, I go to do this kind of debate about twice a week now, is growing all the time. I mean, the audience for the argument is enormous.
Why?
Well, I think for 2 reasons. One is religion is the most interesting subject of all. I mean, if you have a friend or an acquaintance, you know an awful lot about them, depending on whether they attribute their presence in the studio to the laws of biology, the laws of nature, laws of evolution by natural selection, or whether they think that they're here because of a divine plan. It's a big difference, philosophically, morally, And so going into this means you raise all the most interesting, all the most fundamental, basic questions. That's the first thing. So it's never a boring discussion. And second, or it shouldn't be, and the second is that at the moment, if you open the newspaper and see how the parties of God are behaving around the world, everywhere from Russia to Iran to even certain parts of the United States where they think they ought to influence the education system, that people are, I think, becoming fed up with being pushed around by ordinary mammals who think that they are better than us because they have God on their side. Enough with this. It's very insulting, it's very threatening, it's very stupid, and it's becoming, and now we have the chance that apocalyptic weaponry will fall into the hands of messianic states or organizations, Armageddon-type forces. Clear and present danger.
Did you ever believe in God?
No.
Did your parents?
Yes. They must have done at some point. Well, I think my father probably must have done. I don't know this, because of course I always have this doubt about people who even affirm that they believe in God. Do they believe in it all the time? Do they believe in it every day? Do they never have crises of faith? Why do they have to keep on going to church to prove that they believe? Why isn't it simple to them?
Would you say that
But I mean, my father came from a very strong Baptist family. He must, when he was young, I think, have been a believer.
What about your children?
I wouldn't ask them, nor I hope would they want to ask me. I mean, they shouldn't. Obviously, my children do now know. They have to know what I think, because it's well known. But I would prefer that they did not. I think children should be able to make up their own minds about this. Well, I mean, my youngest daughter, for example, younger, I mean to say, goes to Sidwell Friends School, where they're not made to be Quaker, and where they are taught about other faiths, and so they can make up their own minds. That's all I want for them. I would never dream of imposing it on them, and they really ought not to know what my beliefs are, at least until they're of the age of reason. It's repulsive to me to hear people saying, you know, or to see in the newspaper, a Muslim child was killed, or a Catholic child was killed in Northern Ireland, or a Protestant child. How do we know this about them? What choice did they have in the matter? What I mean is, a child victim of a filthy religious war was killed.
I want to show you a picture that was in our first book notes book, right here.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember that
When I was
picture.
still a smoker. Yeah, that's in Timberlake's Bar. I remember it very well.
It is near DuPont Circle, and if you'll notice, this is in the middle of the day. You've got your computer there, you've got a martini on the bar, and you've got a cigarette in your mouth.
And a gut like a, I don't know, sumo wrestler as well.
Would you do that today?
No, I had to give up smoking. Well, I didn't have to, but I made myself give up about 2 years ago.
What about the drinking?
And with the booze, I find it's a better servant than a master.
Explain.
Well, actually, though I say that in that tense, I've always thought that it's very important that it be a master-servant relationship. In other words, that you should get more out of it than it gets out of you. I've found alcohol interesting. It makes other people less boring. It's a great recommendation that it has. Some people can't write or talk or do anything much when they've had a few drinks. Without boasting, I can say that I can, and sometimes that I want to. It can be an inspiration to me. And I know that it can. I know this from friends and from relatives and from one or two episodes in my own life. It can be very bad to have too much to drink. But I have it I still think as a friend and an ally, and not as a boss or a foe.
How do you, this is almost a question for a classroom, but how do you make your money? In other words, if somebody's watching saying, boy, I'd love to live the life of Christopher Hitchens.
And there must be.
No, but when they, I'd love to have that life of words and writing and speaking and all that. How do you, and can you make a decent living doing what you do?
You can if it's all you want to do. In other words, once you've decided that all you want to be as a writer, and once you've learned that all you need really as a writer is to be able to talk, to speak, to have a voice. Many of my students say, is that all you need? You just have to be able to talk? And I say, yes, but how many of you can? How many of your friends do you enjoy listening to? Really? Do you enjoy listening to yourself? I mean, do you try and talk in sentences? And so then they realize it's not so easy. But once you've discovered the joy of that, or in my case, just the fact that I knew was all I could do, I never wanted to do, it doesn't matter. I didn't mind when I first came on your show, I made a few $100 out of it. But I knew I was doing what I wanted to do.
You didn't make a few $100 coming on our show. You made a few $100 out of your writing.
No, nothing out of yours. No, you actually to this day.
We pay you with mugs.
You used to not even pay for my cab, but no. But so I knew that I was making a few $100 a month out of writing, but it was what I wanted to do. So there was nothing to. Now I do better, and if you want to know exactly how I do it, it's this. Vanity Fair, the best magazine in the country, in the world, in fact, in the English-speaking world, pays me a monthly retainer to write them a column, about 10 out of 12 months of the year. And so I know I've got that much. It's not a fortune at all, but it's pretty generous, and I can count on it. The contract is renewed every couple of years or so. And they're fairly decent about letting me write for other people, book reviews, and so forth. And then it's got to the stage now where people will actually pay me to come and talk to them, which is better than I had ever expected. I mean, I'm going to be talking anyway, so to be paid to do it is pretty amazing.
How many speeches a year would you get paid?
Well, since the religion debate got really going and became a big national argument now, a big cultural question, I would say it's probably twice a week. And I do pro bono speeches, of course, for good causes. The liberation of Iraq, for example, I spent a lot of time arguing in public in favor of the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. Didn't get paid for that.
This book, if there were 300,000 copies of this, and you pick up $2-3 a copy, that's pretty good money. I mean, is that? And
then some of my books have done okay, but I used to be box office poison for publishers. I mean, I wrote some books that I was quite proud of, but George Orwell was one I remember, and it didn't really sell at all except among Orwell fans.
This one right
and
here?
then yes, thank you.
I actually found this on the remainder table. I'm sorry to tell you that.
As long as it doesn't have an inscription from me inside saying,
no, it does not.
Saying to Angela with undying love or something. I mean, I hate it when that happens.
What about your book? I'm sure that it causes controversy when you go on Mother Teresa. Did that sell?
Oh, that sells a lot, especially at Christmas time.
At Christmas time?
Yes, ex or lapsed Catholics give it to their families for Christmas on a regular basis. Every year, it's the gift that keeps on giving. And then I teach. I teach at Hoover, and I'm a visiting professor at the New School in New York. I love doing that. I really do. I learn a lot from teaching. That's the whole point. I mean, you go through a book with your class. You think you've read it 50 times. The 51st time, you'll always still notice something you wouldn't have noticed before. You never do read the same book twice. It helps you to write, helps you to think.
Does your wife work?
I wish it paid more. Teaching was better paid than it was, because order that I had didn't have 3 children, because I'd love to spend more time teaching and less time just feeding the beast.
Does your wife work?
She's a screenwriter, which, as you know, means that you're never quite sure whether you've sold a script or not. I mean, so the things are always in play. She's an Angelina.
I have a question. I know you're not expecting this.
I wasn't expecting any of them.
I know, but
we didn't. None of this was contrived.
It sure isn't. But have you ever gotten on your Wikipedia site?
No. You mean
the Christopher Hitchens Wikipedia site? Yeah.
No.
You have never looked at it?
No. I don't surf much anyway.
I just want to. I got on, and it's 20 pages long.
Uh-huh.
And you know how this works?
No, this is an area I'm very poor on. I mean, there are several websites I know about me. I dare say there's a Wikipedia one. There's a website, or there was, called Hitchens Watch or something, that's unfriendly to me. There's another one that is more friendly. I don't have time for this, to be honest.
Well, the reason I ask you this is because when you Google the name Christopher Hitchens, or you Google anybody's name, more than likely the first couple of places to go is Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is written by almost anonymously by, maybe in your case, hundreds of people.
Right.
I found your first Wikipedia site, and you were first up, at least according to what I could find on the records, in 2003. Wikipedia is 7 years old. I just wanted you to hear what people said 6 years ago.
Yeah.
May 18th, 2003. First item, Christopher Hitchens. You see, we as readers don't know who wrote this, but it's a.
Just before we go on, I would say that when I look at Wikipedia myself on a topic I know something about, I generally find it, so I may be giving a hostage to fortune here, I generally find it amazingly reliable.
Well, it's not a question of reliability. It's a question that they can characterize you here, and I want to read.
Well, they're free to do that.
Back in 2003,
Yeah.
what they said, whoever they are. Christopher Hitchens is a British-born American journalist, author, and self-proclaimed political gadfly.
That's not true.
Well,
I'm not self-proclaimed gadfly.
Okay, but here we are.
I've never said the word
This
gadfly
is this
about
week
myself.
in
Yes.
Wikipedia, and
in
this
fact, I've
is
disowned the word gadfly. So they're wrong right there.
Okay, but that's changed since.
Well, how does one get it corrected?
Well, let me read to you what it's today. That's
Okay.
gone. You
Okay,
have to
fine.
go back and say. Today it says Christopher Eric Hitchens.
Yes.
Born April 13th, 1949, is an author, journalist, and literary critic. How we doing?
Well,
boring
but uncontroversial.
I know. Currently living in Washington, D.C., he has been a columnist at Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, World Affairs, The Nation, Slate, Free Inquiry, and a variety of other media outlets. And it goes on, and this is, it talks about your book, God is Not Great and all that. But then it gets down, it says, in 2009, Hitchens was listed by Forbes magazine as one of the, quote, 25 most influential liberals in U.S. media. The same article noted, though, that he would, quote, likely be aghast to find himself on this list, unquote, and that he, quote, styles himself as a radical, unquote, not a liberal. How we doing?
It's all right. But it's getting to the point where you're getting publicity for getting publicity, which is, to me, slightly boring. I mean,
well,
there's too much of this stuff now. I mean, it's all sort of reputation about your reputation.
Often Wikipedia has nothing to do with being exciting or boring because they have so many people get their hands in the pie on this thing.
Yeah, but what they're saying is
they
might as well say there's a perception that rather than the following is the case.
Well, because
I don't know. I can't see why there's so much of this stuff. But
yeah, well,
anyway, I know there is.
It goes on forever and ever, and I just, I was interested in whether.
Well, so will I, for
but
if allowed to do so.
They have the different categories: literary review, Hitchens and the Nation staff, and then they quote one of your old friends, Alexander Cockburn. What's your relationship with him now?
I haven't seen Alexander since his beautiful niece's wedding, where he officiated a little while ago. We used to see a lot of each other, but we live on remotely opposite coasts now. He's in Northern California, and I'm in Washington, D.C.
On about the third page of Wikipedia, or fourth page, it says, among his most severe critics is one-time colleague and friend Alexander Cockburn, a weekly contributor to The Nation. On August the 20th, 2005, Cockburn wrote, "What a truly disgusting sack of you-know-what. Hitchens," and there's another four-letter word,
yes.
The guy who called Sid Blumenthal one of his best friends and then tried to have him thrown into prison for perjury, a guy who waited until his friend Edward Said was on his deathbed before attacking him in the Atlantic Monthly, a guy who knows perfectly well the role Israel plays in U.S. policy, but who does not scruple to flail Cindy Sheehan as a LaRouche and an anti-Semite because maybe she dared mention the word Israel.
Well, he's nearly right about that. I mean, the sack of, etc., is a matter of anyone's opinion, but on the criticisms of Edward Said, I didn't publish them when he was on his deathbed, except in that I kept on publishing them. He and I had a couple of long-standing disagreements, and those didn't change when he was ill, and they didn't indeed change after he died, when I published a sort of estimate of him. I thought a fairly generous one, but which included the criticisms. It's actually rather silly of Alexander to say that, I think, because if you look at his journalism, he would rightly be proud of saying that he's often written counter-obituaries of people who've been overpraised, and he's chosen precisely the moment when there's a lot of sentimental garbage being published to say, come on, this guy wasn't so great. So it's silly of him to, he gives a hostage to fortune in saying that. Cindy Sheehan, I caught out in a lie on Slate. You can check it out. It was exhaustively done with all kinds of threads. She had said she thought her son was killed in a pro-Israeli war, Jewish war for Israel. She later tried to pretend she hadn't said this in an email, and so I caught her I caught her twice. I think it's beneath Alexander to be defending someone as cheap and demagogic as her. I mean, who remembers now the Cindy Sheehan campaign, honestly? And what if we'd listened to her? If we listened to her and pulled out our troops as a result of her hysteria, Iraq would now be run by Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda could have claimed to have driven us out in ignominy and shame. Instead of which, Al-Qaeda has been defeated and humiliated, and Iraq is at least on course to become, many shoals ahead of it, a decent society. No one can possibly wish that Cindy Sheehan had been listened to then or any other.
By the way, I'll be glad to let you see this. This is 20 pages long, one of the longest that I've seen in Wikipedia. So they're defining you, and when you go out to speak, you'd be surprised how often you might be introduced with the information that's contained in here.
Yes, well, I'll bear it in mind. But now that there's YouTube and now there's all this stuff, it's hopeless to even want to, and in fact, fortunately I don't, want to have any control over one's own image.
Let me ask you in our time remaining,
yes.
You're a historian, you've talk about the world, where do you fit 9/11 in events that have happened in world history? I mean, how is this going to fit 25 years from now?
I think it'll fit with a couple of other events. One that, to me, gets more and more significant as time goes by, where you also very kindly had me on. 14th of February 1989, the Ayatollah Khomeini's fatwa against Salman Rushdie. There's a new book by a man called Kenan Malik, an author in Britain, about the fatwa against Rushdie, and it's called From Fatwa to Jihad. And I think that the hinge moment in history, the time when things were turning in a major cultural way, historical way, is somewhere between 89 and 2001, when a wing of Islam, at any rate, a certain arc of the Muslim world, decided that it was at war. And then it took a little time for us to discover that we were at war too. But history does turn a bit more slowly than that. There aren't, when you have a moment like Sarajevo in 1914, say, or some apparent flash of, or the Bastille in 1789, or Lexington. What these flashes illuminate is a scene that's already been prepared, already been set. And that's the way I think to be a historian, the way to look at things.
One of the questions that I know I used to love to get the audience's reaction to is, on our call-in show, is America the greatest country in the world?
Huh. Or as
how would you answer?
Was it Spiro Agnew was supposed to have said, the greatest nation in the country? Something like Gore Vidal has a wonderful take on this. It's something to be proven rather than stated, it seems to me, something to be demonstrated rather than affirmed. But yes, I would say, in this sense, as someone who used to take pride in being called a revolutionary, maybe sometimes for good and sometimes for slightly callow reasons, but anyway, I'm not ashamed of it. Where's the Russian Revolution now? It's gone. Where's the Chinese Revolution now? It's mutated into something completely opposite, different to itself. The Cuban Revolution is moribund at the best. The French Revolution, well, it did have a great effect on the Enlightenment, but it was, and I wouldn't denigrate it, it's French. The American Revolution, the one that says, build your republic on individual rights, not group rights. Have a Bill of Rights that inscribes these and makes them available and legible to everybody. Separate the church from the state. Separate the executive, the judicial, and the political branch. Do all these things. It doesn't sound like much, but it's really a very revolutionary idea. There's hardly a country in the world that wouldn't benefit from adopting those principles. I think that gives the United States a really good claim to be a revolutionary country, as well as, of course, paradoxically, it's a very conservative one. Certainly makes me very glad, very proud to have become a citizen of it.
What's the flag in your lapel?
That is the flag of Kurdistan. The Kurdish people are the largest people in the world, largest ethnic group, if you like, largest nation that don't have a state. The Qatari and Kuwaiti royal families have a seat and a vote at the United Nations. The Kurdish people, who are perhaps as many as 35 to 40 million, don't have any diplomatic representation at all. But they are a big part of Free Iraq. And so I wear the flag as a sign of solidarity with the revolution in Iraq that removed Saddam Hussein, defeated al-Qaeda, and is trying to build a republic.
We've got just about a minute left. You're always traveling. Where's your next trip?
I don't know. Sorry for such a boring answer. My last trip was to Athens. Maybe that's better. So I've just come back. I'm trying to write something about the new Acropolis Museum, the greatest new museum for a long time in Europe. Be opened on 21st of June. It'll contain all the sculpture and treasury of the Parthenon and the other temples of the Acropolis, and it has room for all the stolen sculpture taken by British imperialists like Lord Elgin to be given back, so we can see how all that sculpture is symmetrical and supposed to be seen in the same place at the same time. And I've done a piece of Vanity Fair about how wonderful it'll be when we can see all that.
I suppose I better mention this book one more time.
If you would.
God is Not Great, How Religions Poison Everything by Christopher Hitchens. We are out of time.
Fine bookstores everywhere.
Yes. And thank you for joining us.
No, it was a pleasure, as always.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at Q&A.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.